The hackers had created such a perfect plan to steal nearly $1 billion from Bangladesh's national bank that it seemed impossible for anyone to stop them. They spent an entire year secretly spying on the bank's network. They studied employee behavior, learned how money moved through the system, and carefully used international holidays and time zone differences to their advantage. Everything was calculated, every risk was considered, every step was planned. And yet, after all that preparation, their dream of stealing hundreds of millions of dollars would be ruined by something unbelievably simple. A single spelling mistake. One missing letter would eventually save hundreds of millions of dollars and expose one of the most sophisticated cyber robberies in history. The story began in January 2015. An email arrived on the servers of Bangladesh Bank. At first glance, it looked completely harmless. The email appeared to come from a job applicant and included a zip file containing a resume. Nothing about it seemed suspicious. 3 bank employees opened the email and downloaded the attachment. That small decision would change everything. Hidden inside the zip file was malware. The moment the file was opened, the hackers gained their first foothold inside the bank. This malware was not designed to destroy systems or attract attention. Its purpose was much more dangerous. It was designed to stay invisible. The software quietly opened a secret backdoor inside the bank's network, allowing the hackers to enter whenever they wanted. It also created an encrypted communication channel so that any information being stolen could move in and out without being detected. But the most powerful part of the malware was its ability to spy. It watched, it listened, and it learned. Day after day, week after week, it recorded activity across the bank's network. It tracked which employees used certain computers. It monitored how transfers were approved. It observed which systems remained active during weekends and holidays. It collected usernames, procedures, and patterns of behavior. The hackers were not interested in stealing money immediately. They were gathering intelligence. For the next 12 months, nobody noticed anything unusual. The hackers remained hidden inside the bank's network while learning everything they could about its operations. Over time, they discovered something extremely valuable. Bangladesh Bank kept a large portion of its foreign currency reserves at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Many countries keep their US dollar reserves in accounts held at the Federal Reserve. It is one of the most trusted financial institutions in the world. When countries need to make large international payments, those transactions often pass through accounts held there. For the hackers, this was like discovering where the vault was located. Now they knew exactly where the money sat. But knowing where the money was and actually stealing it were two different things. The challenge was gaining access to the system used to move those funds. That system was called SWIFT. SWIFT is one of the most important financial networks in the world. Banks use it to send secure payment instructions to each other. Every day, trillions of dollars move through SWIFT messages. The network is trusted by thousands of financial institutions worldwide. Breaking into SWIFT directly would be extremely difficult. The hackers knew that. So instead of attacking the system itself, they focused on the people using it. Somewhere inside Bangladesh Bank was a computer responsible for authorizing SWIFT transactions. If they could control that computer, they could send legitimate-looking requests to move money. After months of searching, they finally found it. But they still did not act. Instead, they watched even more closely. For months, they studied how employees logged into the system. They observed how transfer requests were entered. They watched how transactions were verified and approved. Little by little, they learned every step of the process. Eventually, the hackers understood the system so well that they could imitate the actions of real bank employees. They knew what information was required. They knew what large transfers looked like. and they knew exactly how to make a fraudulent transaction appear completely normal. Now, all they needed was the right opportunity. While studying the bank's records, the hackers learned another important lesson. Large transactions usually attracted attention. A single transfer worth $1 billion would almost certainly trigger alarms and require additional approvals. So they decided to divide the theft into many smaller transactions. Months before the robbery, they quietly prepared the receiving accounts. In May 2015, 5 accounts were opened at RCBC Bank in Manila, Philippines. Each account received only $500. After that, they remained untouched for nearly a year. Additional accounts were also opened, including one in Sri Lanka. All of them were created using fake identities. The accounts sat dormant, waiting for the right moment. By February 2016, everything was ready. The hackers had access to the network. They had access to the Swift computer. They understood the bank's procedures, and they had prepared accounts to receive the money. Then came the night of February 4th, 2016. It was a Thursday. Most employees had gone home. The offices were quiet. The hackers entered the system one final time. Using their access to the Swift workstation, they began sending transfer requests from Bangladesh Bank's account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. One request, then another, then another. By the time they finished, they had submitted 36 transfer requests, worth a total of $951 million, just under $1 billion. But the most impressive part of the operation was not the hacking itself. It was the timing. The hackers carefully designed their plan around 3 countries: Bangladesh, the United States, and the Philippines. Each country operated in a different time zone, and the hackers used those differences perfectly. When the transfer requests were sent, it was Thursday night in Bangladesh. Friday is a public holiday there. Banks would be closed. Most employees would not be working. There would be very few people available to notice suspicious activity. At exactly the same time, however, it was Friday morning in New York. Employees at the Federal Reserve were arriving at work and processing transactions as usual. Nothing seemed unusual. Everything looked legitimate. But the hackers had planned even further ahead. The following Monday was Chinese New Year in the Philippines. Banks there would also be closed. That meant even if Bangladesh discovered the theft and sent emergency warnings, Philippine banks would not see them until Tuesday. The hackers had effectively created a 4-day window, 4 days during which money could move freely before anyone could react. It was one of the most carefully timed financial crimes ever attempted. On Friday morning, the Federal Reserve began processing the requests. Millions of dollars started moving. One transaction sent money here. Another sent money there. Funds flowed toward accounts controlled by the operation. Everything seemed to be working perfectly. The hackers had spent an entire year preparing for this moment, and now it appeared their plan was succeeding. Then something unexpected happened. One of the transactions involved $20 million that was supposed to be sent to an account in Sri Lanka. The receiving account belonged to a charitable foundation. While entering the account details, the hackers made a spelling mistake. Just one letter was missing, a tiny error, the kind of mistake that most people would overlook, but someone noticed. The error was discovered by a German bank helping route the transaction. The bank became suspicious. It contacted the Federal Reserve and requested clarification. Suddenly, what had seemed like a routine transfer no longer looked normal. For the first time, cracks were beginning to appear in the operation, and that single spelling mistake was about to change everything. The message from the German bank immediately caught the attention of officials at the Federal Reserve. Something did not look right. The suspicious transaction triggered concern, and staff began reviewing the transfer requests more carefully. Very quickly, they realized they might be dealing with fraud. The Federal Reserve immediately tried to contact Bangladesh Bank, but there was a major problem. It was Friday in Bangladesh. The bank was closed because of the weekend. There was nobody available to answer the phone. Time was running out. By the time officials understood what was happening, $81 million had already been transferred. The remaining transactions were stopped before they could be completed. Nearly $850 million had been saved. Meanwhile, around 4 a.m., the hackers completed their operation and logged out. The malware they had planted immediately began covering their tracks. Evidence was quietly removed. Logs were altered. The hackers disappeared. But there was another question. How could such a massive theft go unnoticed? The answer was surprising. Bangladesh Bank actually had a system that should have detected the robbery much earlier. In one corner of the office sat an HP LaserJet printer. Its job was simple. Every SWIFT transaction entering or leaving the bank was automatically printed. The printer acted as a permanent record of all activity, but the hackers knew about it. So they hacked the printer as well. Instead of printing transaction records, it printed blank sheets of paper. An employee responsible for monitoring the printer noticed the problem, but he assumed it was just a technical malfunction. Rather than investigating immediately, he decided to leave it until later. That decision proved costly. When officials finally returned and accessed the system, they were greeted by warning messages from the Federal Reserve. The scale of the disaster quickly became clear. The hackers had submitted 35 transfer requests. Only 5 had been approved before the fraud was discovered. Ironically, the same spelling mistake that blocked the $20 million transfer to Sri Lanka also caused the remaining $850 million worth of requests to come under suspicion. One missing letter had saved hundreds of millions of dollars. But what happened to the $81 million that had already reached the Philippines? This is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Bangladesh Bank sent emergency stop payment instructions to RCBC Bank. But because of the Chinese New Year holiday, nobody acted on them in time. When banks reopened on Tuesday morning, the money had already been withdrawn. Investigators found this extremely suspicious. The accounts had been inactive for an entire year, yet the funds disappeared almost immediately after arriving. Attention soon focused on an RCBC bank manager. Authorities suspected that withdrawals had been allowed before SWIFT warnings were properly reviewed. The money was then allegedly laundered through major casinos in Manila. Large sums were converted into casino chips. The funds moved through multiple channels before eventually making their way toward Hong Kong. By now, the story had become international news. Governments, investigators, and financial experts around the world began examining what had happened. Court cases followed, investigations continued for years. Eventually, an RCBC manager was convicted in multiple money laundering cases and received prison sentences related to those offenses. Yet the biggest mystery remained unsolved. Who were the hackers? To this day, nobody knows for certain. And much of the stolen money has never been recovered. More than a decade later, the Bangladesh Bank heist remains one of the most remarkable cybercrimes ever committed. It was a robbery built on patience, intelligence, and extraordinary planning. The hackers exploited human mistakes, studied their target for an entire year, and came within moments of stealing nearly $1 billion. But after all that planning, all that preparation, and all that patience, their operation was partially destroyed by a simple spelling error. One missing letter prevented another $850 million from disappearing forever. And that tiny mistake changed the outcome of what could have become the largest bank theft in history. See you in next video. Thanks for watching.